my name is Amy. I'm a librarian at the Blue Island Public Library in Blue Island, Illinois, and I'm happy to be talking to Ava Morgyn today. Ava's latest book is the YA title, The Salt in Our Blood, which came out this spring from Albert Whitman. Hi, Ava. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
I thought we'd just start by talking a little bit about yourself. How did you start your writing journey with your two books?
Well, my writing journey started way before these two books, actually. It's been writing for a really long time. And it really began when my daughters they were actually both in elementary school, but they started getting into reading YA titles, and I was a little worried about their age. And so I started reading all the books they were reading, so that if they came across any material that I thought was a little mature for them, we could talk about it. I didn't want to take a book away, because my parents always let me read whatever I wanted, and I thought that was important. But so I started reading all these YA titles, and that's what got me interested in writing YA specifically.
That's awesome. And The Salt in Our Blood is your second YA novel, which we said came out this year. How is it different working on this book compared to Resurrection Girls, your first book?
They have a lot of similarities, actually, but I think that The Salt in Our Blood is a little more hopeful, and it was important to me to really bring that message through. Also, in Resurrection Girls, my main character is really grappling with a friendship relationship. I mean, she's having some struggles with her family relationships as well, but the most dynamic relationship in that story is the relationship she's having with a friend and neighbor. Whereas in The Salt in Our Blood, my main character is really grappling with her relationship with her own mother. So that's the most conflicted and dynamic relationship in that story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And one thing I really like about your work is that you never shy away from tough topics, which I think is super important for especially teenagers to read as they're dealing through some tough stuff. How do you prepare to write some of these darker, heavier scenes that touch on mental health and trauma?
Yeah, those were a lot. I think I pulled a lot from my own experiences. And then I also pulled from the experiences of people that I know, stories that have been shared with me, just women friends and relatives and other people that we've kind of shared some of the experiences that we've had. So I tried to really pull on real experiences. I wanted to make those scenes as real as possible, and I didn't want to sugarcoat anything, but I also tried to keep it respectful and appropriate. It's not always a really easy line to walk, but I think that everybody goes through traumas of some kind at some point. And so to me, being able to really address that in my work is so important, because that's where sometimes, especially when we're young, it's sometimes the only place we meet with other people who may have experienced something similar, or we feel validated through the experience of a main character we're reading about. But yeah, I mostly pulled on real life experiences.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to this one. The Salt in Our Blood is set in New Orleans, which I absolutely loved. I'm really travel right now, and that's one of the places I was supposed to go to last year, so it was kind of like a treat to experience through your words. Why did you choose New Orleans as the setting for The Salt in Our Blood, and what does that city mean to you?
So I chose it for purposeful reasons, and then also for practical reasons. I really dislike writing a setting that I haven't been to myself physically, because I mean, you can research, but it's not quite the same. Anybody who's ever planned a trip somewhere and then gone, once you're actually there, it's so different than what you were experiencing or thinking you would experience when you were planning it. You're just looking at pictures and reading about it. So New Orleans is a place I've been more than one time. And so it felt like a place I could set a novel in and feel comfortable writing about. But at the same time, New Orleans has that kind of exciting, creative volatility that I felt like really represented Kat's mother, Mary, this sort of larger than life personality. And I think New Orleans was kind of a great setting to put Kat to sort of make her come face to face with all those parts of herself that she had been shutting down, and the things that she feared about her mother and also feared in herself as well. I just couldn't imagine a better place to really put somebody who was a little bit repressed. Because New Orleans is really in your face with it all. And it's such a hub of so many different cultures and so much different activity. And it's a city that I love. I'm not really a city girl. I don't really get excited about visiting different cities, but New Orleans is one of the few cities that I really, really get excited about.
And one thing I love about this book too is that while Kat is going through this immense emotional journey, she has these like aspects of the tarot kind of following with her. And I was super excited to get your book and get the little tarot cards as well. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with tarot and also like the art of tarot that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been a tarot reader. I did it professionally for many years. I probably started reading tarot like in my 20s and had been drawn to it for quite some time, but was a little intimidated, and then finally just couldn't hold back anymore and just dived in. And I took to it very naturally. Any divination process is something that always intrigues and interests me a lot. And tarot is so rich with archetypal language and imagery, and it's been around for so long, and there's so much history to it. And there's also so many different decks that you can explore and play with. And so it's probably one of my favorite divination practices. And like I said, ended up doing it professionally for several years, and really only stopped when we lost our daughter, just because at that point it was too hard for me to be in a room with other people, helping them move through their issues with the art of tarot when I was carrying a lot of weight myself. So it's just been a personal thing for me since then. But it's such a surprising thing. I think a lot of people have misconceptions about what tarot is, especially if they haven't picked up a deck themselves and kind of played around with it. But it never fails me. It's always so fascinating, and it never gets boring. It never gets old. It never gets tiresome. Like every time I pick the deck up, I'm always surprised or excited in some way. And it, to me, is really a window into our own psychological state and where we're at. It's a real window to the soul. So it really helps me get clear on, because I find the cards mirroring back to me things that I'm not looking at head on about myself that I need to see. So that's, I think, what I like about it the most.
Mm-hmm. And I like that in the book too, when Kat receives this tarot deck and is just like experiencing tarot, it's not like, ooh, what's this? So weird, gross.
Right. Right.
It's a very normal thing. What are some of your favorite decks to use in your own practice?
So the first deck I ever got, and I remember buying it at Half Price Books, is the Celtic, no, what is it? It's Druid Craft deck is what it's called. It's a really popular selling tarot deck that's been around for many years. And the artwork in it is sort of very Celtic in nature. And it appealed to me right away. And that's the deck I've used the most throughout the years. I've bought other decks, but I always go back to that one. We have a very strong relationship, that deck and I. And then just recently, I picked up the Star Tarot, which has been around for a long time, but they recently released a second edition, which looks 1,000 times better than the original version they put out. And I have loved reading with that. It's the only other deck I've picked up that I've wanted to read with as much as my original Druidcraft tarot deck. A very different kind of imagery, very different sort of vibe, but it's a great one too. I tend to stick to decks that follow the Rider-Waite symbolism the most, but the Thoth decks are really cool as well. And man, there's so many.
Yeah.
You kind of just get into a collecting, hoarding phase after a while.
Definitely. What inspires you to write about the supernatural or like on the more magical realism side of YA?
I think that's just the water I swim in. Like that's just always been who I am. Even as a little girl, I've always been that kind of highly imaginative, really interested in things that are paranormal or supernatural or outside of the range of normal, everyday, mundane experience. And it's just sort of, as I've grown up, I've just kind of gravitated towards that. And the books that I was reading, I gravitated towards that. And then my writing just naturally kind of came out that way. It's how I live my life. I sort of see my own life as being infused with supernatural elements all the time. And it's been a huge part of my spiritual practice as well. So, it's really natural for me. It would be probably weird for me to try to write something without that. Like that would be really weird. I wouldn't know quite how to do that, I read plenty of stuff without it, but it's so kind of reflective of my own life experience.
Mm-hmm. And there is something special about reading that type of fiction when you're a kid too, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of what age you are, going from middle school to high school to adulthood is like the weirdest, worst time ever. So
yeah, for sure.
It's nice to have an escape to another world.
Yeah.
What were some of your favorite books to read when you were a teenager?
Oh gosh, I read all over the place. I've always been that way. My reading interests are kind of everywhere, but some of the ones that really stayed with me were The Last Unicorn. I very rarely will read a book more than once. I feel like it's because I'm a Gemini and we like variety. That's my excuse anyway. But I rarely will read a book more than once. So if I read a book more than once, it is a big, big deal for me. And The Last Unicorn was a book. I read that book multiple times, loved it so much. I read The Handmaid's Tale in high school. And I remember that being the first time I really fell in love with voice. It was the first time I really experienced voice, which had been in everything else I read, but I just hadn't heard it or noticed it until I read that book. And I fell in love with Margaret Atwood's voice in that book. I'm trying to think. Obviously, The Lord of the Rings. I love The Lord of the Rings. And I read all kinds of stuff. I remember reading V.C. Andrews. I remember reading books that my mom bought for her bookshelves that were old antique books just because they looked cool up there. And I pulled all the novels down and read them. So yeah, but those were some of the ones that really stayed with me. Mists of Avalon was one that I fell in love with early on. And a lot of the books in that kind of series. So yeah.
That's awesome. All great choices. What inspires your writing process? Does it come from more of a personal side, or do you find that you just have an idea and it kind of snowballs from there and turns into a full story?
Probably a little bit of both. I usually have an idea that I germinate for quite some time, sometimes even years. I'll carry something around. The idea I had for Resurrection Girls, I carried around for years, originally as an adult novel. And then it ended up shifting and moving into this way from the point of view of the teenage daughter. And so, but I did pull a lot also from my own grief experiences for that novel as well. So it's kind of a mixture. I'll carry an idea around, and then I can't start writing it until I hear the main character's voice in my head. And once I start hearing their voice, then the writing can really start. And sometimes that's really quickly, and sometimes it takes a little while. And I tend to have sort of a loose scaffolding for what I'm going to hang the story on. There's a few plot points. I have an idea. I know where I'm starting out, and I have a loose idea for the end. And then I have to do a lot of filling in along the way.
Mm-hmm. What do you hope readers take away from reading your books? You know, whether that's The Salt in Our Blood, or if they go back to Resurrection Girls. Yeah, when people, whether they're adults or children, read your books, what do you hope they carry with them afterwards?
I mean, I hope that they find something relatable in the characters. I hope that they can relate to the characters' pain and the different ways that they might be suffering or struggling. I hope that they find some validation in their own experiences by reading about these characters and what they're going through. I hope that they, take away, I think both stories have a note of hope, even though they're dealing with pretty heavy subject matter. And I hope that's for sure something that readers take away. And to be gentle with themselves. I mean, everything's a process, and we're all in progress. These characters start out in one place, they have a lot to learn, and they have a lot of growth to do. And they have to kind of go through these really harrowing experiences to kind of complete that character arc and get to that more involved place at the end of each story. And so I really hope that readers come away with that sense of like, yeah, it's a process. Like I'm not going to be where that character is at the end from the beginning. I started one place, and I have growing to do, and I have things I have to learn. And these experiences that I'm encountering are all opportunities to help get me there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that's one thing that really resonates with me about your work, that even if I don't share the trauma that these characters are going through, it helps you understand and pulls you through, and hopefully helps you learn and grow, hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Do you find and especially with your second book, I'm sure writing during this time
yeah,
probably a lot. When you finish your books, do you celebrate? Do you do a little bit of self-care? Do you say, finally I'm free, and then move on to the next idea?
Yeah, I usually have a period of complete vegetation where it's just like I'm in a vegetative state for several days, refusing to get out of the pajamas, laying around in front of the television, or, reading something really easy and fun, not anything too meaty at that time. And I kind of call it like putting my brain on ice. Like I need to put my brain on ice for a while. And it is kind of an exhausting experience for me. Like by the time I complete a novel, I feel so worn out. I've really been on this marathon experience with these characters. And so I just kind of need to veg out for a short period of time. And then I try to catch up on all the things I ignored while I was writing. So like the, piles of dog hair that need to get vacuumed up around our house, and all the dusting, like the dishes, like all the stuff that's just gotten completely backburnered for months on end. I try to do some catching up with some of that stuff. I get sort of very domestic for a while, like, I'm going to make soups and bake things and like whatever, all these things I don't get to really express while I'm writing. Because when I'm in the writing cave, I'm really only good for that. Even when I'm not actually writing, I'm like taking these breaks where I'm just kind of vegging out on something. And like you asked my family, half the time if they try to come up and talk to me, I can't even like respond to half of what they're saying, or I don't remember anything. So there's a lot of stuff that just gets kind of overlooked during that time. If I were to get up and start doing all of that while I was writing, I would get worn out and then not be able to use all my energy for that creative thinking process. So I try to catch up on all those things, and I pretty quickly start germinating on the next thing. What do I want to write next? Because I don't like the void to stretch too long. There's so much about the journey of publishing that's unpredictable, and you never really know what's going to happen. You never really know how well a book is going to do, or even if it will get picked up or things like that. So for me, the work is where I go to stop thinking about all the stuff that I can't control or do anything about. The work is where I go back home and feel good and safe and powerful again. So it's like pretty quickly, I want to dive back into a new project.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of power in the craft of it all, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's hard to be away from the power sometimes.
It is. The rest of it is really, kind of hard and harrowing for me, and all of the kind of marketing aspects that go along with getting a book put out. And, all of that is where I feel less myself or less in my power. So as soon as I can, I usually dive back into something else.
Mm-hmm. What do you like to read in your spare time?
I read, like I said, I read all over the place. Like right now I'm reading The Revenant, which is probably kind of an odd choice for somebody who writes YA contemporary magical stories, but I'm loving it. It's been really good. So I read all kinds of stuff. I do read a lot of YA, and I really enjoy stories that have magical elements. So whether that's like straight fantasy or magical realism or something along the lines of what I write myself, I love those kind of stories. I love sort of psychological thriller books. I love anything that's kind of based in myth or mythological. I love all of that kind of stuff. And I love stories about women. So I read a lot of, I will hardly ever, it sounds terrible, but I will hardly ever read a book where the main character is male. I do it. It's not that I never do it, but 9 times out of 10, I'll pick a book with a female main character. It's just natural for me. And I love to read female experiences. And so I love to read about relationships between women, whether those are friendships or family relationships or dynamics or things like that. I love those kind of stories. So I really kind of read all across the board, but I do stick to things with sort of a magical or fantastical slant to them a lot. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it makes sense that you would connect with the family element. I feel like, especially with The Salt in Our Blood, figuring out your relationship with your mom is such an,
yeah,
relatable.
Yeah, right. Yeah, for sure. When I started that novel, I remember talking with my agent about it, and we were sharing stories. She was sharing a bit with me about her relationship with her grandmother, and we were kind of sharing back and forth. And I was like, this is such a universal experience for young girls and women too. I mean, kind of working out your relationship with your mom can be like a life's work, like it can take a lifetime to sort some of that stuff out. But moms play such a pivotal role. And I think the relationship between mothers and daughters can be particularly complex. And to me, that makes it fascinating. There's just so much richness to dive into there. But yeah, I definitely had that thought as well. Like, this is really something, even though not many teen girls will necessarily have had the experience of having a mother who's diagnosed with bipolar disorder and is grappling with such a heavy mental health diagnosis, but they will understand that basic premise of, God, my mom is so embarrassing. I can't believe she just said that in this restaurant, or oh, my mom is so annoying, or that just that sense of conflict I think is something that everybody's been through.
Mm-hmm. And with you being a mom, do you have those experiences now on the other side where your kids are the ones saying, God, my mom is so annoying.
Yeah, I definitely have had that. I think I got really lucky. It was really fortunate in so many ways. I had really easy teenagers. I have two daughters and a son. And I'm sure my mom really was waiting for me to get it, like to really get back what I gave to her. But I didn't get that experience. I got wonderful kids who were really great teenagers, and it was all pretty wonderful and easy. But even so, they still definitely had their moments. And my daughter, Evelyn, who we lost in 2017, probably went through that the most with me. Like just, she, I just reminded her like that she had a chore to do. She'd be like, she would just roll her eyes so much. I was like, aren't you dizzy for rolling your eyes that often? You know? But mostly we had really good relationships. It wasn't terribly contentious, but you know, yeah, I'm still a mom. They definitely still get annoyed. And so it does work both ways for sure. And when I wrote The Salt in Our Blood, I could really relate to and sympathize with both characters in that novel. Kat and Mary, both of their perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Who do you hope picks up your book, since we're nearing the
end? Who do I hope picks up my book?
Yeah, like new readers, whether they're adult, teens, people looking for something and they happen upon your book.
Really? I mean, I think anybody, and certainly anybody, like I said, who can kind of benefit from the experience of feeling validated or feeling a relatable connection to that character's pain. I think pain is a universal experience. So even when we may not have it to the same degree, or we may not have it for the same reason, especially adolescents are all familiar with pain and what it feels like to be in emotional pain or some kind of mental pain, the struggle to kind of grapple with those things. So I think anybody who can get something out of that and feel connected to those characters and feel a little bit less alone in their experience, I would love for anybody like that to pick up the books. And I've had a few readers reach out to me from those perspectives, and it makes me feel incredibly grateful, not just that someone was entertained by this novel, but that somebody connected in a way that made them feel a little bit less alone in their experience.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, that's why you do it, right?
Absolutely.
Well, you can get, I have your books right here. You can get The Salt in Our Blood or Resurrection Girls through your local bookseller. They're both from Albert Whitman, and they're both out now. So thank you so much for talking to me. This has been a real treat, and I hope we get some other librarians getting your books into their library too.
Yeah, that would be great.